The storm didn't give warning. One minute, Warren Buffett stood confident behind his desk in the Berkshire Hathaway offices. The next, his world began to shake. News breaking across every channel. A trusted investment had collapsed overnight. Billions were gone. Buffett's fingers trembled slightly as he read the update again. "It's not possible," he whispered. But it was. Panic swept through the markets, media hounds descended, and doubt crept into boardrooms. For the first time in decades, the Oracle of Omaha looked vulnerable. His empire, built on decades of trust, precision, and patience, was now bleeding from a wound no one saw coming. "I made a mistake," Warren admitted to himself. Not just a mistake, the mistake. A single miscalculation rooted in emotion, not reason. The silence of his private office rang louder than the chaos outside. Warren looked out the window as if searching for a past version of himself, the boy from Omaha, wondering how far that boy had come, and how far he might fall. Just hours earlier, Buffett had been addressing a crowded hall, his signature calm drawing admiration. "We never bet on emotion," he told them. Yet somewhere beneath that veneer of certainty, a ripple of doubt had begun to stir. The investment he now regretted had felt wrong from the start. Too rushed, too influenced by voices he didn't normally heed. As he walked off stage, applause echoing behind him, the weight of his decision had already begun to settle. "Is this the first crack?" he wondered. The man famed for his patience had been hurried. The man known for clarity had felt confused. Now, in hindsight, he could almost hear the warning signs in the applause. Louder than usual, almost desperate. The glow of admiration from his peers had masked the tremor beneath his feet. Buffett, in his suit and calm smile, walked through the hallway of adulation, never suspecting that the storm had already begun brewing. The news spread like a virus. Analysts shouted over each other, media tickers looped endless footage, and online forums erupted. Buffett made a bad call. Someone posted. Others laughed. Some wept. Stocks linked to Berkshire plummeted by association. Investors panicked, dumping not just the failing asset, but anything connected to it. Warren watched quietly as decades of cultivated trust began to dissolve in hours. But what hurt more wasn't the money, it was the narrative. He was supposed to be different. Above the fray. Immune to fear. Now, he was being lumped in with the reckless, the impulsive. He whispered, "They think I've lost it." In that moment, surrounded by silence and screens, Warren wasn't the oracle. He was an old man facing a world that had suddenly moved faster than he could calculate. Inside the quiet halls of his Omaha home, Warren sat in the same chair he'd occupied for 50 years. The familiar smell of old paper, cherry wood, and quiet wealth surrounded him. But tonight, it all felt foreign. He picked up a faded book, The Intelligent Investor, his lifelong guide. He opened it to a random page, searching for something. A reminder. A rule. A truth. Anything to anchor him. "Price is what you pay," he murmured. "Value is what you get." The words echoed. But their weight felt different now. He was older. Slower. And maybe, just maybe, fallible. For the first time in decades, Warren Buffett stared into the abyss of self-doubt. The empire still stood, for now. But foundations had shifted. And the man who'd always known what to do, no longer did. Midnight approached. Outside, the world churned with rumors and market madness. But within Warren's house, it was deathly still. He paced slowly, past old awards, newspaper clippings, and framed letters. Each artifact whispered a reminder of the man he had been. But none offered comfort. Not tonight. He paused by a framed note from his father. "Never forget who you are." His fingers brushed the glass. The message was clear. If this was to be a fall, it would be on his terms. "I won't run," he said softly. The storm could rage outside. Critics could jeer. But Warren Buffett would face it all. Alone, perhaps. Flawed, surely. But without disguise. He walked back to his desk, sat down, and began to write, not a rebuttal, not a press release, but a letter to himself. A reckoning. Long before the chaos, there was only a boy in Omaha. A boy with a relentless hunger, not for money, but for answers. Young Warren wasn't chasing wealth. He was chasing logic. He counted bottle caps, sold newspapers, memorized statistics. Patterns gave him peace. The world was noisy, but numbers were still. If I can measure it, he once said, I can understand it. His bedroom became his first trading floor. Maps on the wall, price charts scribbled in notebooks. While other kids played ball, Warren read financial pages with the focus of a general studying battle plans. His mind sought clarity, not chaos. That boy, glasses too big, confidence too quiet, was already building a fortress of thought. The seeds of discipline, obsession, and control took root here. And though the empire lay decades away, the soul of the investor had already formed. Howard Buffett was more than a father, he was Warren's compass. A principled congressman and man of quiet integrity, Howard taught by example. He preached self-reliance, humility, and above all, values that didn't bend with fortune. Warren remembered sitting beside his father, watching him write letters to constituents, always with care. Money's a tool, son, Howard once said, not a god. Those words struck deep. Years later, even as Warren built one of the greatest fortunes in history, he clung to those roots. His father never chased power, never craved wealth, yet commanded respect. In the darkest hours of Buffett's life, he returned to that voice. Not charts, not models, just his father's tone. Steady, moral, doubt, clear, rare. The boy inside him still listened, still needed to, still measured every risk against one question: what would Dad have done? By the time he reached Columbia Business School, Warren had already read Benjamin Graham's The Intelligent Investor 3 times. But meeting Graham in person was electric. Here was a man who treated investing not as gambling, but as philosophy. Graham's rules, margin of safety, intrinsic value, spoke to Warren like gospel. In Graham's lectures, Warren sat front row, scribbling furiously, nodding before the sentences were complete. You are not buying stocks, Graham would say. You are buying businesses. That reframing rewired Warren's brain. It wasn't price. It was value. It wasn't motion. It was meaning. Wow. The chaos of Wall Street became for Buffett a chessboard of clarity. And from Graham, he didn't just learn technique, he learned restraint. The market is there to serve you, not instruct you. That lesson would later become Buffett's armor against the madness that tried to consume him. After Columbia, Buffett returned to Omaha, defying every voice urging him toward Wall Street. I wanted to think, he explained, not chase. In his small home office, with barely more than a desk, a filing cabinet, and a phone, Warren built the early foundations of his empire. He read obsessively, 10, 12, 14 hours a day. Annual reports stacked like fortresses. He made notes in the margins, circled numbers, wrote letters to CEOs. No noise. No headlines. Just thought. If I'm right 60% of the time, he reasoned, I win. He knew it wasn't speed that built wealth, it was clarity, conviction, and time. Friends didn't understand. Some called him eccentric. But Warren felt free. Away from the noise, he found his edge. In Omaha's silence, Buffett's voice became sharper, clearer, and more dangerous to the chaos of Wall Street than ever before. And then came Susie. Not just a wife, but a quiet force behind Warren's rise. She believed in him when others questioned his odd habits, his endless reading, his resistance to the spotlight. Susie brought music, warmth, and emotion to a man who saw life in numbers. She smoothed the edges of his logic with grace. You may be the mind, she'd tell him, but someone has to be the heart. In the years that followed, as Buffett's success soared, Susie grounded him. She hosted charity events, soothed public tensions, and protected his silences. But more than that, she reminded Warren who he was without the numbers. Without the empire. Just a man. Their bond wasn't loud. It was rooted. And when life tested him, when the markets turned against him, Warren often found strength not in theories or formulas, but in Susie's quiet, unwavering belief. As Berkshire Hathaway grew, so did the expectations, and the weight. Every move Buffett made now echoed across global markets. He was no longer just an investor. He was a symbol. And symbols aren't allowed to stumble. Reporters dissected his choices, competitors waited for cracks, and shareholders demanded miracles. In private, Warren began to feel it. The pace of change accelerated. Algorithms replaced analysts. Speculation replaced study. The game was shifting. "They don't read anymore," he muttered, watching traders cheer meme stocks and digital coins. His strategy hadn't changed, but the world had. And now, for the first time, Buffett wondered if being right wasn't enough. Could patience survive in a world obsessed with speed? Could discipline matter when chaos was more profitable? As the storm outside raged louder, Warren's quiet method began to feel like defiance. Then came the shareholders' revolt, not loud, but sharp. Younger investors questioned his strategies, doubting his refusal to leap into tech, crypto, and speculative startups. "The oracle's gone soft," some whispered. In the annual meeting, Warren stood on stage as a trusted lieutenant challenged him publicly. A tension gripped the air. He listened, chin low, nodding politely. But inside, the sting was real. Not because of the attack, but because it came from someone he mentored. Loyalty was cracking. He responded softly. "I don't invest in what I don't understand." The crowd offered polite applause, but the chill remained. This wasn't a debate, it was a warning. Time was passing. The next generation wasn't just knocking, they were demanding entry. And Warren, for the first time, felt like a man guarding a door that others were ready to kick open. The media smelled blood. Headlines shifted, from admiration to skepticism, then to mockery. "Out of touch." One cover read, "The last dinosaur." Another. Warren flipped through the articles, unread. He didn't need to see them. He felt them. Every whisper about his age, every laugh about his boring portfolio echoed through boardrooms and press briefings. Even allies began suggesting he step back, delegate more. "You've earned your rest," they said. But rest wasn't what Warren feared. Irrelevance was. He had never chased trends, but now the world punished him for not doing so. He stared at the phone, silent for hours. No calls, no questions. Just silence. The markets still moved, but without him. The Oracle of Omaha had become background noise. And Warren began to wonder if discipline still had a voice in a world addicted to noise. In the quiet corners of his memory, Warren returned to an older fear. The fear of becoming his own blind spot. The man who once laughed at the arrogance of Wall Street was now facing his own potential hubris. Had he held on too long? Had he become what he once warned others about? He replayed old interviews, scanned past letters to shareholders. There were signs, little decisions made on instinct rather than logic. Trusted voices he had ignored. Gut calls made with more emotion than data. "I may have believed my own myth," he admitted. The legend of Buffett was now a shadow over the man. And the truth? That shadow was heavy. Not because of guilt, but because it meant he might have lost what made him great. The brutal, honest, humble self-questioning that built his empire. Now, he would need to resurrect it. The world didn't wait. Another financial storm was brewing, fast, erratic, and brutal. A sudden downturn in global markets sent panic through portfolios worldwide. Clients called. Investors bailed. Old allies begged him to change course. "Get in," they said. "Follow the momentum." But Warren didn't move. Not yet. He paced his study as screens blared warnings. This moment. This was the test. His gut screamed for action. His heart demanded a win. But deep beneath it all, that old voice, the boy from Omaha, whispered, "Think." In silence, Warren reopened a folder. A company no one cared about. Stable, not simple, undervalued. He smiled. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. But it was right. As others fled the fire, Warren leaned in. "Be fearful when others are greedy," he murmured. "Be greedy when others are fearful." The old strategy wasn't dead. It had just been buried. And now, it was rising. It began with a simple envelope, unmarked, resting at the corner of Buffett's desk. Inside was a memo. One of his trusted lieutenants had quietly liquidated a portfolio Buffett had explicitly asked to hold. Billions had been moved. Behind his back. The betrayal cut deeper than numbers. It was trust fractured. Warren sat in stunned silence, eyes scanning the memo again and again. This wasn't just a breach, it was a warning. Someone close had decided he was no longer the voice to follow. He picked up the phone, hand trembling slightly. "Why?" he asked. The voice on the other end didn't lie. "Because you're not who you used to be." No shouting followed. Just breath. Just realization. The empire wasn't being attacked from outside. It was crumbling from within. And Warren understood. This wasn't about one trade. It was about control. The mantle was slipping. That night, Warren walked through the quiet corridors of Berkshire's headquarters. His shoes echoed against marble floors that once hummed with voices of confidence and camaraderie. The office portraits, old partners, colleagues, mentors, seemed to watch him. One by one, faces from his past. He stopped before a photo of Charlie Munger. A man of reason, wit, and brutal honesty. "You tell me to fight," Warren whispered. But Charlie was gone now. And Warren was alone in a building he had built, yet no longer fully ruled. He sat at a bench in the lobby, memories rushing in. Deals made. Calls missed. Red flags ignored. And the truth hit hard. It wasn't just others who doubted him. He had begun to doubt himself. And that doubt had opened the door to betrayal. Somewhere along the path he had stopped listening to his own voice. The media had sensed something was wrong. Leaks emerged, whispers of internal conflict, strategy shifts, power struggles. A former insider gave a damning interview. The Oracle's vision is clouded. The story exploded. Stockholders panicked. Calls came in faster than Warren could answer. His advisors urged a response. Something public, something bold. But Warren didn't reach for a camera. He reached for an old notebook. Inside were scribbles from decades ago. Hand-calculated valuations, notes from Graham, quotes from Munger. And then one, underlined in red, "Never explain. Your work is your answer." He looked up. That was the twist. Not the betrayal, not the loss of control, but remembering what he had forgotten. His strength wasn't in charisma or PR spins. It was in thinking when others shouted. This crisis wouldn't be solved by noise. It would be solved by clarity. Buffett called an emergency board meeting. "At the George point," he said, "I typed out an industry." No script. No teleprompters. Just truth. He laid out every error he had made, his oversight, his hesitation, the betrayal he hadn't seen. There was silence. Then disbelief. But then something shifted. Not in them, in him. "I can't promise perfection," he said. "But I can promise principle." For the first time in months he wasn't defending. He was leading. The room didn't erupt in applause. There were no cheers. But heads nodded. Trust isn't won in noise. It's rebuilt in silence. One board member leaned in and said, "Then let's start over." That was the moment the tide turned. Not with profit margins. Not with forecasts. But with truth. And Warren, humbled but clear, took back the helm, not with force, but with renewed conviction. The Oracle wasn't dead. He had just gone quiet for too long. Later that evening, Buffett walked alone through Omaha's old neighborhood streets. The same routes he'd taken as a paperboy decades ago. No cameras. No bodyguards. Just silence, gravel underfoot, and the scent of summer. He paused outside the modest house where it all began, peered through the darkness toward memories carved into walls long changed. "This is who I am," he whispered. Not the wealth, not the headlines, but the boy who studied, sold, saved, believed. The twist wasn't that he had been betrayed. The twist was that he had forgotten his beginning. And now, he remembered, the empire may have faltered, but the foundation, discipline, simplicity, truth, was unshaken. Warren turned, the street empty ahead. But his steps were steadier. And for the first time in a long time, the voice inside him was loud again. The markets buckled again, this time with a vengeance. A cascade of economic triggers sent panic spiraling across global exchanges. This wasn't a dip, it was a storm. Banks froze. Hedge funds collapsed. Politicians scrambled. But in Omaha, Warren Buffett didn't flinch. He sat in front of a stack of research on a company. No one was watching. Stable, essential, overlooked. The numbers were clean. The leadership, strong. The fear around it, irrational. Everyone else was running from the fire. Buffett was stepping toward it. "This is it," he whispered. The world begged for drama, for reaction. Instead, Buffett placed a call. Quiet, dull, calculated. Final. Me. "We're buying," he said. Billions moved in silence. It wasn't a gamble, it was a stand. In that moment, he wasn't a man chasing redemption. He was a man doing what he always had, seeing value when no one else dared to. Critics erupted. "He's gone mad," one headline screamed. Pundits laughed. Investors panicked. Social media ridiculed him. But Warren didn't respond. He didn't post. He didn't explain. He waited. Days passed. Then weeks. And the tide began to turn. The company he'd backed? It held firm. While others collapsed under volatility, it delivered. Steady. Predictable. Real. Real. The silence grew louder. Suddenly, the man mocked as outdated was being hailed again as visionary. But Buffett didn't gloat. He simply closed a folder and moved to the next. The victory wasn't in headlines. It was in the numbers. "You can't be swayed by noise," he told an aide. "The market is a voting machine in the short term, but a weighing machine in the long term." The weight of his conviction had once again bent the arc of financial history. The boardroom was different now. No longer divided, the team sat silent as Buffett explained every move, every calculation. But this time, there was no script. Just logic. The once skeptical lieutenant who'd challenged him earlier nodded slowly, visibly moved. "You were right," he admitted. But Warren raised a hand. "I wasn't right because I predicted. I was right because I waited." The distinction mattered. This wasn't luck. It was discipline sharpened by years. The lesson wasn't about being brilliant. It was about staying grounded when brilliance wasn't enough. The board leaned in, not just to hear strategy, but to feel conviction. Something had shifted. Buffett wasn't proving himself anymore. He was passing something on. Not control, but principle. He had reclaimed leadership, not by resisting change, but by anchoring it in something timeless. But the victory came at a cost. Susie had been gone for years, but in moments like this, Warren felt her absence like a scream in silence. In the quiet of his home, he pulled out one of her old letters. "You were always meant to be more than a number," she had written. Her words landed heavier now. Yes, he had defended his legacy. But at what expense? Missed birthdays. Absent dinners. Moments that no market could ever return. He folded the letter gently, eyes wet. The climax of his career hadn't been one trade. It was this: realizing success didn't erase sacrifice. That night, He didn't read balance sheets. He sat by the piano she used to play, letting silence speak. And for the first time in months, maybe years, Warren allowed himself to miss her. Fully, quietly, honestly. Then came the letter. Not to investors. Not to the press. But to himself. Warren sat at his old wooden desk, pen in hand, and wrote as he had when it all began. No spreadsheets. No filters. Just thoughts. Truth. He wrote about fear. About aging. About mistakes and memory. About love. And about how the real strategy had never been to beat the market, but to master oneself in a world constantly losing control. When he finished, he folded the letter and sealed it. For the next Buffett, he whispered. Because this wasn't just a moment of victory. It was a passing of wisdom. The climax wasn't the win. It was the clarity to walk forward, knowing who he was again. Not perfect. Not immortal. But resolute. And with that, Warren leaned back, closed his eyes, and let the quiet hold him. The headlines began to change. Quietly at first. Then, in waves. Buffett's move pays off, the oracle still sees. But Warren didn't smile. He didn't gloat. Because the story for him was never about redemption in the public eye. It was about realignment in the private one. He walked the halls of Berkshire again, not as a myth, but as a man who had stared into the collapse of his identity and survived it. Staff who once whispered now greeted him with eyes full of respect, not for the profits, but for the perseverance. He passed the same office where betrayal had once struck. This time, he paused, nodded, and kept walking. The hurt remained. But it no longer controlled him. Recovery wasn't about perfection. It was about motion, grounded in truth. The wound had scarred, but that scar now wore wisdom. A letter arrived from a young investor. Handwritten, Muncie. Nervous. Honest. I've studied everything you've taught, it read. But I'm scared. The world doesn't reward patience anymore. Warren read the line twice. Then he folded the page, sat back, and smiled, not with amusement, but recognition. He had been that young man once. Full of doubt. Hungry for validation. And now, decades later, the world had changed, but the fear was the same. Buffett responded. Not with formulas. Not with instructions. Just a single sentence. Patience is still the sharpest weapon in a noisy war. He knew the letter might never make headlines. But maybe, just maybe, it would guide a hand. And that, more than any deal, any stock, was the real return on investment. Not capital. Character. In Omaha's community center, Warren gave a rare small talk. No cameras, no press. Just him, and a room full of teenagers. He didn't speak about billions. He spoke about books. About setbacks. About how wisdom often wears plain clothes. It's not about the money, he said. It's about who you become while waiting for the right moment. A silence settled. Not from awe, but connection. These kids weren't stockholders. They were dreamers. And Buffett, in that quiet room, wasn't a mogul. He was just a man passing on a story about resilience, risk, and reason. A girl raised her hand and asked, "What was your biggest gain?" He smiled gently. "Still becoming it," he said. And they believed him. Because the real legacy he offered wasn't profit. It was purpose. As the seasons shifted outside, Warren returned to his rituals. Reading in the morning light. Writing letters no one would see. Watching the birds from his window with coffee in hand. The noise of the world faded, replaced by rhythm. Not retirement, but reflection. He no longer needed to prove anything. His empire stood. His methods, once mocked, had endured. Yet his greatest triumph wasn't survival, it was staying himself through it all. In a world that begged him to chase, to conform, to reinvent, Warren had remained, steady, stubborn, and self-aware. His clarity wasn't loud. It was earned in silence. And in that silence, he discovered that the end of a battle doesn't always mean the start of rest. Sometimes it means peace. And peace was enough. One evening, Warren stood before a mirror. No cameras. No audience. Just him. The face that stared back was lined, slower, softer, but not diminished. He thought of the boy who'd counted bottle caps, the young analyst worshipping Graham, the man who'd loved Susie, the titan who'd been humbled, then rebuilt. Each version of himself stood with him in that reflection. "You did the best you could," he whispered. And for the first time, he believed it. Not as a defense, but as truth. The resolution wasn't a moment. It was an acceptance of all he had gained, all he had lost, and all he still had to give. Warren turned from the mirror, walked back into the quiet, and didn't look back. Because clarity, when finally found, doesn't need confirmation. It just needs to be lived. The annual shareholders' meeting returned. Same hall, same chairs, but something felt different. Buffett took the stage, no fanfare, no dramatic entrance. Just a man with a microphone and a lifetime of experience. The applause came slow, then strong. He cleared his throat. "I'm not here to predict. I'm here to remind." A pause. That reason still matters. That patience still pays. That character still counts. No grand market forecasts. No flashy slides. Just a conversation between past and future. Younger faces leaned in closer than ever before. They weren't just here for advice. They were here to understand the soul of what made him who he was. And Buffett, steady as ever, stood not as a god of finance, but as a teacher. One who had failed. One who had learned. And one who still believed in the long game. After the meeting, Buffett stepped into the quiet backstage corridor. He removed his mic, unknotted his tie. The adrenaline faded, replaced by calm. An aide approached with a question. He smiled and waved them off. "Tomorrow," he said. There was no rush now. He walked alone to the parking lot. No fanfare, no security detail. Just Warren, carrying a worn leather briefcase he'd had for decades. The night air was cool. The city lights flickered in the distance. He breathed in deeply. The chaos of the market, the noise of the world, it could wait. Because this moment of stillness was his greatest wealth. He unlocked his modest car, slid into the driver's seat, and for a few seconds simply sat there, no movement. Just presence. Because sometimes what matters most isn't what's next. It's what is. On a quiet weekend, Warren returned to the old neighborhood once more. Not to visit, but to give. He met with local school kids, donated to the library, helped restore the playground where he once delivered newspapers. But he didn't speak of stocks. He spoke of discipline, of kindness, of time. He shook hands with teachers, posed for no cameras, and left no speeches behind. A local janitor asked him why he still did it. Buffett smiled. Because value isn't always listed on a balance sheet. That was the legacy he had fought for, not just an empire of wealth, but a memory etched into the lives he touched quietly. The world might remember his trades, his letters, his empire. But here, among children and chalkboards, he was remembered as something simpler. A neighbor. A giver. A man who never forgot where it began. As twilight fell on Omaha, Buffett sat once more in his study, surrounded by old letters, reports, and fading photographs. A single candle flickered beside him. He reached for a file marked "Final Notes." It wasn't a will. It wasn't instructions. It was a manifesto, a record of his values, written plainly. Never follow the crowd, it read. Know what you own. Understand what matters. And remember, money is a consequence, not a compass. He smiled faintly, adding one last line. Keep your inner scorecard. The world may chase quarterly wins, but Buffett had always measured differently. He folded the note, placed it in a sealed envelope, and tucked it beneath a book on his shelf. He wasn't finished yet. But if this was to be the close of a chapter, it would close on his terms, with clarity, with character, and with quiet conviction. The final scene is still. A wide shot. Warren Buffett stands alone in an open Nebraska field at sunrise. No buildings. No screens. Just horizon. The wind moves gently through the grass. He closes his eyes, breathes in and smiles. Not for the empire, not for the headlines, but for the journey. Behind him, decades of battles, markets, victories, regrets. Ahead of him, open land, open sky. A life lived not for applause, but for principle. He begins to walk forward, slowly, steadily, not toward anything, but with everything. And in that moment, the silence says it all. The wealth of Warren Buffett wasn't measured in billions, but in choices made when no one watched. The journey was never about conquering the world. It was about mastering the self. Fade to black.